The world is surrounded by water. Oceans cover over 70% of the Earth's surface. So here's a simple question. Why are cities running out of it? In 2018, Cape Town nearly became the first major city to completely run out of water. A day zero that sent shockwaves through global markets. If we can turn seawater into drinking water, why isn't every coastal city already doing it? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why desalination looks like a perfect solution, and why it might be the most expensive trap we've ever built. This is Tomorrow Explained. I'm Dennis Lisak. We explore the systems shaping the world just ahead of us. When people hear about water shortages, the answer seems obvious. Just use the ocean. And technically, we can. It's called desalination. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel already rely heavily on it. In fact, over 50% of Israel's domestic water now comes from the sea. On paper, it's a miracle. We finally hacked nature to provide an infinite resource. So, problem solved, right? Well, that's where the math and the physics starts to break. Here's the problem. Desalination doesn't fail because it's impossible. It fails because it's expensive. A single large plant like the Claude Budd Lewis plant in Carlsbad, California, cost $1 billion to build and took nearly 20 years to greenlight. But that billion-dollar construction cost is just the down payment. Once it's running, it requires massive amounts of energy every single hour of every single day. Because removing salt from water isn't just a plumbing job. You're fighting entropy. Most modern desalination plants use reverse osmosis. Imagine trying to push water through a solid stone wall. That's essentially what happens. You're forcing seawater through ultrafine membranes, gaps so small that only water molecules can pass, leaving the salt behind. That pressure requires energy, a lot of it. Desalinated water can cost 2 to 5 times more than traditional water from a river or an aquifer. And here's the loop. The places that need water the most often don't have cheap, reliable energy. In Kuwait, desalination can consume up to 10% of the country's entire primary energy supply. We've traded a water crisis for an energy crisis. If the price of oil or electricity spikes, the price of surviving in the desert spikes with it. But there's a new problem emerging that we didn't account for 20 years ago. Our oceans are no longer just salt and water. They are filled with microplastics and forever chemicals like PFAS. Because reverse osmosis depends on incredibly delicate membranes, these pollutants can clog the system, or worse, require even more intensive chemical pretreatment. We are finding that the infinite resource of the ocean is becoming increasingly difficult and expensive to clean. We aren't just filtering salt anymore. We're filtering the industrial waste of the last century. Even if you solve the energy problem, you run into a waste problem that most people never see. For every gallon of drinking water produced, desalination creates a concentrated, hypersalty byproduct called brine. And that brine has to go somewhere. Most of the time, it's pumped back into the ocean. But this isn't just salt water. It's a toxic, deoxygenated sludge, often laced with anti-scaling chemicals and chlorine. Globally, we produce over 140 million cubic meters of brine every day. To put that in perspective, that is enough to cover the entire state of Florida in a foot of sludge every single year. When you dump that back into the sea, it sinks to the bottom, suffocating seagrass and killing the very marine life we depend on. You're solving one environmental problem by creating a biological dead zone. This leads to a shift in global power. Water used to be about who owned the river upstream. Now it's about who owns the technology and the fuel. Look at Singapore. For decades, they relied on water piped in from Malaysia. It was a massive strategic vulnerability. By building high-tech new water and desalination plants, Singapore bought its independence. But that independence came at a staggering cost. They are now tethered to a high-maintenance industrial system that requires constant investment. This is the new reality. Water security is no longer a gift from nature. It's an industrial commodity you have to defend. Let's say you solve cost, energy, and environmental impact. You still have the last mile problem. Desalination plants are built on coasts, but many of the cities in the most danger, like Phoenix, Las Vegas, or Mexico City, are hundreds of miles inland and thousands of feet above sea level. Water is heavy. Lifting it up into the mountains costs billions more in pumping stations and massive pipelines. In California, the State Water Project is already the single largest consumer of electricity in the state, just to move water around. Adding desalination to that mix creates a logistical nightmare that takes decades to build. That works until the power grid fails. At this point, I'm curious, do you think desalination should be scaled globally, even if it's expensive? Or should we be focusing on radical conservation instead? Let me know in the comments. There is a hidden risk for cities that go all in on desalination. I call it the economic death spiral. When a city spends billions on a plant, they usually take on massive debt. To pay that debt, they have to sell water at a high price. But if citizens start conserving water to save money, the city sells less water, making it harder to pay back the billion-dollar loan. This forces the city to raise prices even higher, which leads to even more conservation. This happened in Australia during the Millennium Drought. They built billions of dollars worth of plants, only for the rains to return. The plants were mothballed, but the citizens are still paying for them on their monthly bills years later. Here's the part most people miss. Desalination works, but it doesn't scale easily. Globally, there are over 18,000 desalination plants, yet they provide less than 1% of the world's drinking water. Why? Because water systems are local, but desalination is centralized, brittle, and energy intensive. It's not a plug-and-play solution. It is a high-maintenance life support system for a city. So why can't we just turn ocean water into drinking water? Because it's not just a water problem. It's an energy problem, an infrastructure problem, an economic problem, and a systems problem. Desalination isn't the answer. It's a backup plan. In places like Dubai or Perth, it's a necessity. For the rest of the world, it's the last resort. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Water doesn't disappear. It just moves somewhere we can't easily use. I've said before on this channel that cheap food isn't normal. It's a temporary system. The same is true for cheap water. The systems we built, our rivers, our reservoirs, our aquifers, were designed for a world with stable weather and predictable snowpack. That world is changing. Our systems haven't caught up, and we are trying to buy our way out of it with billion-dollar machines. We are treating the symptom, not the system. So here's the bigger question. Do you think technology will eventually solve water scarcity, or are we reaching limits that technology simply can't fix? I'd genuinely like to hear your take. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to Tomorrow Explained, because the systems we rely on every day are far more fragile than they seem, and understanding them now might matter more than ever. I'll see you in the next one.